land, for the transgressions of a land, many are the princes thereof, but by a man of understanding and knowledge the state thereof shall be prolonged. And so the key there is on the word of understanding and knowledge in this text. As a result of that, the leadership and the state of that organization or that nation is long. In other words, it's strong and it endures, because that is exactly what is necessary for a good leader and for the leadership of a nation. Do you ever notice that when you read the Old Testament and you read in the Kings, how, especially in the line of Israel, how quickly the princes were replaced? I mean, they were assassinated one right after the other. And everybody was fighting for the throne, and there was wickedness and assassinations and all that kind of stuff going on. And the people were in constant turmoil and oppressed. And that is because of the transgression. For the transgressions of a land, many are the princes thereof. And yet, but a man of understanding and knowledge, the state thereof shall be prolonged. And you want to think about that. You might want to circle the words strong and endure, because these are the two benefits of having strong leadership in a nation or in an organization. And I think you could apply this to your own family, because I think you could say a family will be strong and endure when there's good leadership. And a business or a church has the same promise. And I think there's few things needed in today or in the life more than good leadership and more than stability. And we need it in our homes, we need it in our nation, and I thank God that I feel that we have some of that stability in our nation. But there are rapid changes and upheavals, and we need stability in our life and in our church and in our country, and that comes from leadership. There's no mystery about it. And so tonight we're going to talk about some things, about some principles of leadership as they are seen in the book of Nehemiah. And I don't know of a book anywhere ever written that deals with the principles of leadership any better than the book of Nehemiah. I remember there's an interesting book out. It's called Nehemiah the Executive. I used to have that book, but I loaned it to somebody. One fellow said, I don't know any accountants, but I know a lot of bookkeepers. And I've loaned out a lot of books and never got them back. And so that book I loaned it to somebody, so I hope they enjoy it. But nevertheless, Nehemiah, the thing about Nehemiah, you just assume he's a little guy because he's called the Nehite. And so he's just probably, somebody said he's the shortest guy in the Bible, but there was a guy called the Shuhite. And then I guess Simon Peter was smaller than that. He said, silver and gold have I none, and you can't get much shorter than that, But nevertheless, Nehemiah is probably one of the greatest leaders, one of the great leaders in the Bible, and his book is probably one of the greatest books on leadership found anywhere. And when preachers and teachers and writers want to write or teach anything about leadership, this is usually the book they go to, because the principles are so well laid out. And let me just say, first of all, that nothing happens until someone provides leadership for it. Nothing happens until someone provides leadership for it. I mean, I've been here 35 years, and I've just, I've been here long enough to know that unless you put people in the right position who will take leadership, it's not going to happen. The bus is not going to get out of the parking lot. The building is not going to get cleaned. Works is not going to get done. You've got to have responsible people in leadership, and nothing gets done unless someone provides leadership for it. It's not what you expect, it's what you inspect. And it'd be nice if everybody just did what they're supposed to, but we don't, you see. And so, it's the law of life, and you just have to look at history. The NASA space program was nothing until a guy named John Kennedy made the statement that we're going to put a man on the moon and bring him back. And somebody had to take the leadership and to make sure that that kind of thing happened, you see. The same thing's true in your family. You've got to take the leadership. You cannot have in a family where there's no leadership. You're just kidding yourself if you think both people can lead the family. They cannot. Because when both people try to assume leadership, nobody assumes leadership. Don't you understand that? And if both people are responsible, nobody's responsible. That's just the way it works. And so somebody has to take the leadership. Now, I really don't care who, but somebody needs to do it. So if the kids are going to lead, let them lead. If the wife is going to lead, just let her lead. If the husband's going to lead, then do it. Now, I know who I think ought to be doing it. You understand me? I'm just being a little bit, sarcastic, which is, out of character. But I'm just simply saying that there's nothing worse than not providing leadership. See? And a lot of men who don't want leadership, they blame their wives and put that off on their wives, and they don't want to make decisions because if you make a decision, you can be held accountable. And so, there's just a lot of that going on. You're just going to have to buck up and take the leadership. I tell young folks before you get married, you ought to settle that before you get married. Who is going to be responsible? See, that doesn't mean the guy's right. I'm not saying that. I'm not talking about who's right. But I'm talking about an organization or a family or a nation that doesn't have leadership is in total confusion and apathy, and it's going to fall apart. It's going to fall apart. That's exactly what Proverbs chapter 28, verse 2 said. And so you have to, I think most problems can be traced to a lack of competent leadership. And the greatest problem today is a leadership shortage, especially in the church. It's not that people don't have leadership ability, because leadership can be learned, as we'll see, but it's folks that will not step up to the plate and take the leadership. Because leaders aren't always liked, because they have to make decisions. And if you make a decision, you're going to be criticized. So people who would have leadership ability will not take it because they're afraid of the criticism. They themselves may have been critical, or they are critical of the leaders, so if they become a leader, they know they're going to be criticized. So the safe place is to stay in the grandstands and criticize the quarterback. How many, we talk about grandstand quarterbacks. We know what they do wrong, and we know what we do that's safe. We stay in the grandstand. All right, so in this book of, in the book of Judges, you have 7 cycles. They're up and down and up and down and up and down. And the last verse in the book of Judges says, every man did that which was right in his own eyes. And there was no king in Israel. And, that is suggestive in itself. When there is no leadership, no definite leadership, everybody does that which is right in their own eyes. And then you have chaos just like they had in Israel. So you have to make decisions. And, of course, it ends up in the matter of instability. And so, my philosophy at Open Door Baptist Church has always been this. If I'm going to take the heat, then I'm going to take the responsibility for the leadership. You understand what I'm saying? I'm not going to be the leader or let somebody else be the leader of the ministry of Open Door Baptist Church and then me take the criticism. If my wife's going to be the leader, then I'm going to point her out and you can criticize her. If your wife is the leader, then I'm going to point her out and let everybody criticize her. You understand what I'm saying? So I don't mind taking the leadership, and I don't mind taking the criticism. I know it goes with it. That's okay. But there's nothing worse than somebody not having the authority or the responsibility for a ministry, but having to take the criticism for that ministry. You have to let people go. You have to turn them loose within certain parameters and let them do their work. See? And so leadership then, just remember this, nothing happens until someone provides leadership. It's not going to happen. And number 2, leadership is influence. Leadership is influence. If I had to summarize leadership in one word, it would be influence, either for good or bad. Because that's really all leadership is. It's influence. And there are positive leaders and there's negative leaders. And all you have to do is get out on the playground where children are playing and watch for about 5 minutes, and you can see who the leaders are on that playground, for good or bad, can't you? Because they're just there, you know. Excuse me, you'll see it with a group of teenagers. In about 5 minutes, you'll know who the leaders are. If you ever sit in a committee meeting, it won't take long to figure out who the leaders are. I don't mean who's got the title leadership. I mean who the leaders are. And the way the leader many times is identified is people will look at the leader. In other words, you ever notice how that when a question's brought up, certain eyes will go to a certain person and look at them? See? That person is, people who do that are waiting for that person to make their decision before they make theirs. So you may have the title of leader, but that doesn't mean you're leading. Because it's not a title or it's not necessarily a position, it's your influence. And some of the greatest leaders in a church don't have titles. They have influence. And smart people at the top know who these people are. See? And so I'm just simply saying that it's a leadership. Paul told Timothy, he said, when he was a young man, he said that he was to be a good example. That's an influence. And there in 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 12. So age has nothing to do with leadership. It's not how old you are. It's not how much gray hair you've got. It has nothing to do with it. A man can be young and have good leadership. And he can be old and have sorry leadership. So just keep in mind that it has nothing to do with your age or necessarily your title. And but you can have influence. And the truth is, whether you know it or not, you are a leader to some degree because you do have influence. Now, you may only have influence over one or two people, but that you are setting an influence. You are leading them by your influence. You may have influence over 8 or 10 people or a dozen people or something, and some men. You know, I think of a brother DeMichael down in Boise. I mean, it didn't take me 5 minutes to figure out this guy's got great leadership. But you know what it is? It's his influence. You can see he's got character, among other things, but he has great influence. And so the issue is not whether you're a leader or not, because you are a leader. The question is, are you a good one? Is your influence for good? Do you influence people for good? Because you do influence them, whether you know it or not, and I'm sure you do know it. You're a leader in your home. You're a leader at work. You're a leader at school. And once again, the issue is, are you a good one? Are you a good leader? Do you have a good influence? And so a biblical definition of a leader would be a leader is someone with God-given ability and responsibility to influence a group of God's people to accomplish God's purpose for that group. I'm going to read it again. I don't know if you have it in your notes or not. But a biblical definition of a leader is someone with God-given ability and responsibility to influence a group of God's people to accomplish God's purpose for that group. So it's ability and it's responsibility and influencing that group to carry out God's will or purpose for that group. Now, Nehemiah was an outstanding example in the Bible. And, of course, I guess the test of leadership is anybody following? The test of your leadership is anybody following. Right? So if you want to know whether you're a leader or not, just look over your shoulder. Jesus said, "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me." So if you want to know if anybody's following, you can just look. And Paul makes it very clear that we ought to follow the example of Jesus Christ, because we all need human models. We need examples. We need someone, just as someone needs you to be an influence for them, you and I need someone to be an influence for us. See? And Paul said, "Be a follower of me as I am of Christ." So we all need human models. And of course we're to follow the Lord Jesus Christ. We're not to follow people who don't follow him. That would be disastrous. But, you don't want to get so spiritual that you think God doesn't set up and use men and women. He does. That's how God works. I don't know where we get this idea, that, well, I just follow the Jesus. No, you don't. If you don't follow people that God has put in leadership over you, you're not following Jesus Christ. That's just an alibi. See? Try telling your boss you're not accountable to him. I'm just accountable to the Lord. You wouldn't do that because you know it wouldn't pay off. Tell a police officer, well, you know what? I don't give an account to earthly authorities. I just give an account to God. You wouldn't do that because you're chicken. See? And I hope you're smart enough to know not to do it, because you'll find out that God has set these guys up as hitmen, see, to take care of guys like you. God has established authorities. He's established governments. And they don't have to be saved. It's good if they are. It's good for us if they are. In fact, it's good for society. But they don't have to be. They still are in authority. And that's the way it is in the government. That's the way it is in school. That's the way it is if you're going to work somewhere and get a paycheck. That's the way it is at the place of work. God has set it up that way. That's the way it is in the home, and that's the way it is in church. I had a fellow one time when Brother Newell worked for me, and he went down to talk to a fellow, and he said, now, here's what we want done. And the guy told him, said, I don't work for you, I work for God. When a guy says that, he means really, I don't work for anybody but myself. See? Right. And so, we are followers. We are followers, and that's okay. But you want to be followers of somebody who's a good influence in your life. The radio programs you listen to, the messages you read, the sermons you hear. And there are many good leaders out there. There's some great leaders in the Christian world. Thank God for them. But, God is looking for leadership. John Maxwell, his parable of leadership, it said, he who thinks he lead and has no one following is only taking a walk. He who thinks he leads and has nobody following is only taking a walk. So leadership has absolutely nothing to do with titles or positions. This is the dilemma folks make. Sometimes they're given a title, supervisor, coordinator, captain, lieutenant. Not necessarily does that make them a leader. So a title does not make you a leader. And that's why it's vanity to look for titles. A title won't make you any better than you were yesterday. It may open a door for you, but your influence will have to keep the door open. You understand what I just said? A title may get a door open for you, but your influence is what will keep it open. A title may get you a job, but your influence is what keeps the job, not your title. And so there are many people who have authority, but they don't have leadership because they don't have the right kind of influence. And so if you have to tell people you're the leader and remind them that you're the leader, you're not. If you go home and tell your wife, now you're going to listen to me because I'm the leader around here. Hey, you ain't. You just lost it. See? And so you don't have to do that kind of, you don't have to do that because it's influence. Then the same thing is true in the home. You don't have too much trouble, in most cases, following people who have a good influence in your life. They're not too hard to follow. See? And husbands need to check up on that. You need to pray and ask God to help you to be a good husband, a good example. When was the last time you prayed, Lord, help me to be a good example to my wife? Help me to be a good husband. Help me to have a good influence. Because, the home really is God's place to where, now listen carefully. God instituted the home so you could learn how to die to yourself. Because you can't have a good relationship in home until you do die to yourself. It's impossible. And I think that was God's, among other things, that's God's intention, so you can learn how to die. Now, the same thing is true with our kids. Kids don't obey us because we, they may until they get to be 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 years old, but they're not going to continue to do that. Kids don't obey us because we have the title dad or boss, see. And so we need to do everything we can, and I think, once again, the test of our leadership is as someone following, and you can't force people to follow you no matter what you do. You can't force it. It's not going to happen. It's all influence. And then the fourth thing is the foundation of leadership is character, not charisma. This is a mistake that, you hear people, amateurs will say, oh, he or she would make a good leader because they're so outgoing, or, they're so aggressive, or they're so loud, or they talk a lot. Absolutely none of those have anything to do with leadership. They have nothing to do with it. And so, a lot of TV evangelists have lots of charisma, but they bombed out because they had no character. Did you ever see a car salesman without charisma? You can almost spot a salesman, can't you? They're slick. They got a line. They can talk. They talk like barbers all the time, But they're always trying to sell you something. Maybe politics they're trying to sell you, but they're trying to sell you something. But nevertheless, these TV evangelists, we all know that, and the majority of them have character defects. Not all of them, of course, but many of them. But the foundation of leadership is character, not charisma. It's not, people think it is. They think it's, if they're slick and they got personality and they can win an argument and all of that kind of stuff, they think they're leading. Not really. A lot of people are just polite. They aren't following you. And but let me just say this: you don't have to have charisma to be a leader, but you do have to have character. You do have to have character. You have to have credibility, because leadership is influence, and if you don't have credibility, nobody's going to follow you. That is, if they know you. See? So reputation is what people say you are, but character is what you really are. Reputation is what people say you are. But character is what that fly on the wall says when you're by yourself. When he's looking over your shoulder. D.L. Moody said character is what you are in the dark when nobody's looking. Paul lays out the leadership characters for the church. He says, we know that leaders come in all types and all shapes and all sizes. And some of the least likely people become great leaders, and I guess we call them least likely because we've stereotyped them, which is the major mistake. But there is really no one leadership temperament. Some of you remember a few years ago when Tim LaHaye wrote his book on the Spirit-filled temperaments. Remember that? There was Mr. Choleric and Phlegmatic and Sanguine and Melancholy. Remember all four of those guys? He had little pictures of all of them and did, that's interesting. And people fall into those categories. Some of them are a blend, but they'll have a dominant characteristic or dominant personality, and you can see it in the leadership of our country. Someone said Nixon, he was a choleric, and he got the job done, and he forgot everybody else's feelings just to get it done. And he was replaced by Ford, who was phlegmatic. He was an easygoing guy, don't rock the boat, no great vision, but he brought stability to the nation after Watergate. And then there's the melancholic, that was Carter, and he saw gloom and doom everywhere, and he felt deeply about everything, was sad and so on. Kind of like Bill Clinton feeling your pain. And then, of course, Ronald Reagan was sanguine. His don't worry, be happy, That's kind of his approach, you see. But nevertheless, all four types were leaders of our country. And you have to get over this idea that there is one kind of a leadership. I think Bill Clinton has, whether you like it or not, I think Bill Clinton has got one of the best personalities of anybody I've ever seen. He is camera slick. He's not stupid. Don't kid yourself. But he's immoral. See, that's his problem. See, that's his problem. And it probably started back when he was a kid, back when he was a young man, young teenager, and it just, and then when he got into power, it became more and more available, and he became a very immoral person, and that's what's ruined him. See, even the Democrats, many of them won't vote for him because, Christian Democrats, because of his moral problems. You wouldn't vote for George Bush because he's a Republican if he was immoral, I would imagine. Right? So you must be saying that character is most important. And character is far more important than personality. See? And, but you see, we get that thing. But now with television, that's not so. With television, personality is everything. That's what Hollywood is. Hollywood is all talent and personality and no character. The most corrupt bunch of people on the face of the earth. But they got the cameras. You understand what I'm saying? And they groom them. So all great leaders have character. Now, when you look at Nehemiah, you're going to see a man whom he was a very ordinary person. And he was his own man. And even though I said that there are models who influence us in the matter of leadership, you still have to learn to be your own person. Because if you try to imitate somebody else, you're like David trying to put on Saul's armor. And you need to be your own man or your own woman. You will not be a better leader just because you try to take on somebody else's personality. In fact, it may hurt you. Probably will. You become frustrated and trying to act. You'll be acting. You won't be yourself. And so, you wind up with all of this burnout and all these things. So, don't say, I want to be like so-and-so. That's not important at all. You need to be who you are and let God use what you have, because the truth is you are unique as far as God's concerned. There's nobody else like you. There's nobody in the world like you. Now, that must be important because God made you. And if you would just let God use who you are, don't try to be somebody else, don't try to be something you're not, and use your influence for good, God will use it. You don't have to be like somebody else. See? And so, one thing about all great leaders, even though they have different personalities and different styles, they have one thing in common, and that is their credibility or character. They have to have this if they're going to have people to follow them. In Hebrews chapter 13, verse 7 and 8, it says, remember them which have the rule over you, who have spoken unto you the word of God, whose faith follow, considering the end of their conversation or behavior. Now you notice, first of all, I think that people who have leadership have a message worth remembering. They have a message worth remembering. It's like E.F. Hutton, when he speaks, people listen. And, when we respect people, respect their character and their credentials, we listen to them because we expect to learn something. We expect God is going to use them to teach us something. And so leaders will have a message. Think about it. Leaders have a message. And so people listen. It says, remember those who have spoken to the word of God in you. Eventually there's something worth remembering. They were told. The second thing is they have a lifestyle worth considering. Notice he says, consider the end of their conversation or behavior. In other words, does their walk match their talk? Does their life match what they say? That is, are they worth listening to? And consider the source is what he's saying. And then, last of all, they have faith, I think, worth imitating, because it said, whose faith follow. And so when we think about leaderships, we think about, remember that it is character, it's not charisma. All right? And another thing is leadership can be learned. Leadership can be learned. Now, if I didn't believe that, I wouldn't be preaching this sermon. I wouldn't spend my time trying to train leaders, but I believe it can be learned. And you can have an influence for God, even if you're a leader of one. That's okay. Did you know that when Jesus sent out the 12, he sent them 2 by 2, and he probably put one in charge over the other? When Paul went out, it was Paul and Barnabas, Paul and Silas, and so on. You really don't have to have a lot of people to have a great influence. See? And so it can be learned, and you ought to try to learn it. And then if you've got it, you ought to try to teach others. And but it can be learned, the leadership techniques of this. And every one of you, I think, can be the kind of leader God wants you to be. In Philippians 4:9, it says, "Those things which you have both learned and received and heard and seen in me, do, and the God of peace shall be with you." So he said the things you've learned. Well, Timothy had learned by watching, and those believers had learned from Paul. And he said, those things you've learned and seen in me, do. And obviously he told them in 2 Timothy to teach others as well. Now keep in mind, there's no such thing as a born leader. You know, I've read books, tons of them on leadership, and there are those that try to say, well, leaders are born and all of that. Well, of course, all leaders are born. They're here. But no one is a born leader. And they are made by the way they respond to circumstances. Dr. Newell says that leadership rises in a crisis. I was thinking today about this. I kind of visualizing a fellow leading a group, and he comes to a river and the bridge is washed out. And the bridge is washed out, and one kind of leader would look and say, the bridge is washed out. We can't go on. Another kind of leader would say the bridge is washed out, and then he says, here's what we've got to do to get across. See? Leadership influences people to go around the obstacles. We need to find out what the barriers are and remove them. I read a book years ago. The title of it is, I Love the Word Impossible. I have found the impossible takes just a little longer. But you have to take certain things out of your vocabulary, like can't. A fellow said to me years ago, Kant died in England. It took me a long time to figure out what he was trying to say. Kant died in England. And you've got to get over that idea, can't. Now, you may not be able to under the way you're moving, but, you know, you can call it anything you want to. A fellow said to me not long ago in a class a few years ago, he said, what kind of plans did you make in case you failed at Open Door Baptist Church? You know what I said? I never planned to fail. I don't plan to fail. I mean, that's stupid. You don't plan to fail. You plan to succeed. Now, you may need an A and a B and a C plan, just in case the first plan doesn't work. But if you make a plan to fail, you probably will fail. See? You get across the bridge and burn it. I think it was Billy Sunday said that if a man looks back, it's only a matter of time till he goes back. So you're going to have to get focused and learn leadership and just quit making excuses. You know what? I'm probably naive. You know what? I believe I could build a bus route of 60 to 100 people on it. I do. I have no doubt that I could get out here with a bus route and have 60 to 100 people on it. But you know what I would do? I would show up here at 9 o'clock in the morning. At 10 o'clock in the morning, I'd be out knocking on doors, and I would knock on doors until the sun went down. I would. And I'd knock off for maybe a snack, and I'd get back out and knock on doors some more. In other words, I know how to do it. I know it can be done, but you have to work at it, and you have to be consumed by it, and you have to want to do it. You understand what I'm saying? It's just not that difficult. It's just not that difficult. But you have to have the character and you have to have the commitment. And if you're not committed to something, you can never do anything. And a leader, I remember Dick Meyer, my pastor, said to me when I was a young man in college, he said, look, if a leader wants his people to jump 1 foot high, he must jump 10 feet high. In other words, you've got to have 10 times more influence than the people that are following you, because you're setting the example. You are the leader. That's what it means. And so it can be learned. I don't look at people and say they can't be a leader. They may not be a leader in a particular area that you've put them, but everybody's a leader in some area, and it can be learned. And I think the priority of training leaders is what Jesus Christ's ministry was all about. That's why he took the 12. He spent more time with the 12. He spent more time with 12 people than he did the multitudes. D.L. Moody said, I would rather train 10 soul winners than win 10 souls. You can see the wisdom in that, can't you? But a fellow who's in love with soul winning won't ever train anybody. You got to love soul winning and love souls, but you also got to train people. And that's what Jesus Christ did, and that's what you can do in any ministry you're in. And but his public ministry, and he had a public ministry and a private ministry. And in his public ministry, it involved preaching and teaching and healing. But in his private ministry, it was training. And you have to have both. You have to have both. The Lord had both of those. He fed the masses, but he spent most of his time training the leaders. I said he fed the masses, but he spent most of his time training leaders. And I believe leadership can be learned. Next, the moment you stop learning, you stop leading. Man, I thought that when I graduated from Bible college, my school days would be over. Well, after 35 years, I'm still just trying to keep up with things. You never stop. If you're leading, you never stop learning. You have to read. People are well educated today. People have information everywhere. People have standards. They want things done right. Its quality is important to people. You go to a restaurant, you expect it to be clean. You expect good service. See? And so you have to, in a church, if a church stops learning and stops progressing, it's going to be left behind by our culture. You say what you want to, but it's still going to happen. And so leaders have to be learners. Every leader is a learner. The moment you stop learning, you stop leading. And the moment a pastor, as a pastor, he stops growing, his church will stop growing. I got folks sitting in here that have earned doctor's degrees. Most folks in here have high school, have college education. See? And so folks expect to be taught. They know what teaching is, and they know what it's not. And so they expect something. They expect some to learn something new occasionally from the Word of God and from their pastor. And so I just can't keep rehashing old sermons. See? You have to keep learning. And as I've said, it's true in any field you're in. Brother David's got this media ministry. I don't know if he knew how to turn a camera on before he got here. Now he's over the whole thing. But he's learning about all this stuff. And he has to keep learning because he has to stay ahead of his guys. He doesn't have to know everything, but he has to know something. You're saying? He has to know what he wants. Has to know how to get the help for them that they need. Those are important things. Ecclesiastes chapter 10, verse 10 says, if the iron be blunt, that is, if the axe is dull, and he doth not whet the edge, he doesn't sharpen it, then he has to put forth more strength. Did you ever try to cut a tree down with a sledgehammer? Wouldn't that be dumb? You reach in the garage and you get a sledgehammer to cut down a tree. But that's about what it's like if the axe is dull. See? But notice it says wisdom is profitable to direct. What does that mean? Well, it means if you're smart, you just won't keep working harder. You'll get a file and sharpen the axe. you really don't always have to work harder, but you do have to work smarter. I was with Larry Chappell in Korea many years ago. My wife and I were visiting, and Larry Chappell was a missionary there doing a great work in Korea. I was really impressed with the number of churches and his Bible Institute he started and the Korean pastors he was training. And we were driving somewhere that one particular day, and I said to him, I said, man, you really must be working hard. I'll never forget what he said. I mean, this has been 25 years ago. He said to me, he said, Brother Blue, you don't have to work harder, you got to work smarter. You understand what I just said? Now, of course, if you're a carpenter, you have to do both probably. But in leadership, you have to work smarter, and you have to learn, and you have to constantly be educating yourself. And the truth is, a fellow who goes to college, has a profession, probably going to have to be educated 5 times before he during his lifetime. Because what you learned 5 years ago is almost outdated. You're going to school all the time, right? Yeah, this guy's, really, he's in school all the time. You'd think you could learn it all, but you can't, because there's always new things to be learning. And that's true with any profession. See? And so you can't stop. When you stop learning, you stop leading, and so on. Now, I just want to say a few things about the background of Nehemiah. Nehemiah, of course, as I said, was probably one of the greater leaders in the Bible. In 586 B.C., the city of Jerusalem in Israel was destroyed, and the Jews were deported all over Babylon, which is modern Iraq. So that gives you some idea. They were kept there. They were for 70 years. They were kept in Babylon. But in 537, the first group of Jews were allowed to return. And then in 516, the temple was rebuilt. And in 458, Ezra led the second group of Jews back to Jerusalem. And then in 445 BC, Nehemiah asked permission to return to Jerusalem. And this was the third group, and they were going back to rebuild the wall. Now, Nehemiah was a well, let me just say this, that the problem was at Jerusalem. The city had been destroyed. It had laid waste for 70 years. It was during that period of time the Samaritan race developed. The poorest of the people were left in the land, and they married in with the Gentiles, and that's where the Samaritans came from. They were half-breeds. They were half Jew and Gentile, and so this land laid this way for 70 years, and God allowed small groups to go back, and they went back and rebuilt the temple. It was a pitiful sight compared to the former temple, and Nehemiah heard word that the city was destroyed, and the wall and the gate was burned with fire. And when he heard all of this, the Bible said he sat down and he wept for many days. Now, Nehemiah was not from Jerusalem. He was born in captivity, because this is the end of the 70-year period. So perhaps he'd never been up there. I don't know. But nevertheless, he learns about it. And the people there were defenseless, because in those days you had to have a wall around the city or you could be in serious trouble. And Nehemiah's profession, Nehemiah was a cupbearer. He brought the cup to the king, and that was an important position, because you had to be absolutely trusted if you were going to have that title, that position. Excuse me. You didn't have somebody working for you to bring you your cup that you couldn't trust.